Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about enteral nutrition. So, enteral nutrition is any method of feeding that uses the GI tract to deliver nutrients and calories. So, after you have done your nutrition assessment, which we have talked in another video, you can go and check it later. You now determine the function of the GIT. So, is the GIT working? Kindly note, when the GIT is working, you have to use it. So, if it's working, yes, you use enteral feeding. If it's not working, you use parenteral feeding, which we are going to talk about it later. However, today's video is talking about enteral feeding. So in enteral feeding, there's hierarchy of feeding. So what do I mean by hierarchy of feeding? So for example, if you have a patient and is unable to eat sufficient nutrients, you give this, or you start with this patient with oral nutritional supplements. If you have another patient who is unable to take these sufficient calories orally, or this slow dysfunctional swallowing, now you go to the NG tube, that is the nasogastric tube feeding. Then if the esophagus is blocked or it is dysfunctional, then you go to gastrostomy tube feeding. If the stomach is still inaccessible and or you have outflow obstruction, now you can use the duodenum. I hope you have understood that hierarchy. So you don't just come, you meet any patient and then you just give them a duodenostomy. No, you have to assess the GI of this patient. So if this patient is able to feed, there is no abnormalities in the GI, then you start at the superior hierarchy. If this patient is unable to swallow, for example, or is unable to take these oral supplements, then you give NG tube. I hope you understand. So this is kind of a summary. If you have the mode of feeding, it's either sip or tube. So in tube is where you have fine bore, you have NG tube. So you can read this for more information. So what are the advantages of enteral feeding? As we have stated before, if your GI is functioning, kindly use it. And we have several methods that we have talked about the hierarchy. So what are the advantages? Why we keep saying use the GI? Number one, it preserves the gut integrity, it decreases the likelihood of bacterial translocation, it preserves the immunological function of the gut, it increases the compliance with intake, the cost is less, and it can be accurately monitored. So what are the complications of enteral feeding? We start obviously with the tube. So if you're using tube, for example, the tube can be malpositioned. If you use an NG tube, you can malposition the tube, you can displace, there can be blockage or leakage, erosion of the skin mucosa. The next we go to GI. You can either have diarrhea, bloating, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, aspiration, and constipation. So another complication is solute overload, where you have diarrhea, dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, where you have hypokalemia, hypomagnesium, hypocalcemia. So this in short is, I can describe it as, so when you give this patient, for example, who has been malnourished food, normal physiology states that when glucose is absorbed by the intestine, which hormone is produced? Insulin is produced. So when insulin is produced, its function is to take this glucose into the cells. So insulin does not only take glucose into cells, but also takes electrolytes like kalemia, that is potassium, resulting to hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, etc. I hope you have understood that concept. Next, here we said aspiration. So in this aspiration, it can be caused due to either overloading, or when you place the patient in a supine position, or if the patient is unconscious, for example in surgery.